meaningful discussion. To that end, we will mobilise the Council at all levels, both physical and with help with technology. Throughout, we will be attentive to the Parliament's views. In this spirit, we reviewed carefully the resolution you adopted at the last plenary on the new MFF, own resources and recovery plan. As mentioned on that occasion, continuous cooperation between the Council and the European Parliament will be an essential part of the process, whether at horizontal level or at sectorial level. I take this occasion to remind you that beyond the MFF agreement, there are dozens of other negotiations. They concern programmes that turn EU support into actions on the ground. There too, time is of the essence. We have to make as much progress as possible at sectorial level. We need to make the most of the time available now. We owe it to all the future beneficiaries of these programmes, including students, small businesses, local authorities and others. Now more than ever, they will need our support to get their projects off the ground. This too will help the recovery of our economies, our regions and our cities, and we look forward to working with you to meet these expectations. Thank you very much for your attention.
Grazie.
Thank you very much, Minister. I would now like to give the floor to President von der Leyen.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, President. Ladies and gentlemen. Europe is constituted by generations, and each generation has its own history. For the founding generation of our Union, the history speaks of building a lasting peace, where all that was there was the pain and rubble of destruction. For the subsequent generation, it was a question of continuing prosperity and liberty by choosing linking up our single market and generating our single currency. Subsequently, there was a question of bringing our European family together by getting our brothers and sisters out of the cold and welcoming our brothers and sisters here at the heart of our union in our common house. All of these generations and all of these historical successes have been built on what had been inspired previously for those to come later. And the choices had always been either to go the way of the weakest link or to forge forward with a vision and an ambition in a common direction. At these decisive points in time, we have always chosen to forge forward together, because for Europe, the most ambitious measures are always those that are the most certain. Those are the ones that have allowed us to build a union of peace and prosperity, unprecedented and unparalleled in the history of the world.
Today, we face our very own defining moment. What started with a virus so small your eyes couldn't see it has become an economic crisis so big that you simply cannot miss it. Our unique model, built over 70 years, is being challenged like never before in our lifetime or in our union's history. The common European goods we have built together are being damaged. Things we take for granted are being questioned. There is the single market that needs to recover. There is the playing field that needs to be made even again. There are 4 freedoms that need to be fully restored. The crisis has huge externalities and spillovers across all countries. And none of that can be fixed by any single country alone. A bankrupt company in one member state is a reliable supplier gone for business in another. A struggling economy in one part of Europe weakens a strong economy in another part. This is about all of us, and it is way bigger than any of us. This is Europe's moment. We see the economic, fiscal and social fallout across all member states. Divergences and disparities widened. Complex questions of sovereignty and burden sharing have to be balanced. And so, in front of us, once again, is that same binary choice. We either all go it alone, leaving countries, regions and people behind, and accepting a union of haves and have-nots, or we walk that road together. We take that leap forward. We pave a strong path for our people and for the next generation. And for me, the choice is simple. I want us to take a new, bold step together. Europe is in a unique position to be able to invest in a collective recovery and a common future. In our union, people, business and companies depend and rely on each other. In our union, cohesion, convergence and investment are good for all. And in our union, we know that the boldest measures truly are the safest for the future. And this is why the Commission is today proposing a new recovery instrument called Next Generation EU, worth €750 billion. It will sit on top of a revamped long-term EU budget of €1.1 trillion. Next Generation EU, together with the core MFF, sums up to €1.85 trillion in today's proposal. It goes alongside the three safety nets of €540 billion already agreed by Parliament and Council. And in sum, this would bring our recovery effort to a total of €2.4 trillion. Honourable members, allow me to explain how Next Generation EU will work. The money will be raised by temporarily lifting the own resources ceiling to allow the Commission to use its very strong credit rating to borrow money on the financial markets. This is an urgent and exceptional necessity for an urgent and exceptional crisis. Next Generation EU will invest in repairing our social fabric, protect our single market, help rebalancing balance sheets across Europe. And while we are doing this, we need to press fast forward towards a green, a digital and a resilient future, because this is the future of Europe's next generation. This generation that is globally connected and feels responsible for our world, our planet, with a clear vision to promote human dignity and the rule of law, determined to hold governments more accountable for fighting climate change and saving our nature, driven by the idealism for Europe and the belief that our union must strive for better. So beyond showing solidarity to overcome the crisis of today, I want to propose a new generational pact for tomorrow. Yes, the effects of this crisis mean that we need to make investments on an unprecedented scale today. But we will do it in a way that Europe's next generation will reap, will harvest the benefits tomorrow. Investments that will not only preserve the outstanding achievements of the last 70 years, but that will ensure that our union is climate neutral, is digital, is social, and a strong global player also in the future. And to make this happen, Next Generation EU will direct its massive financial power to invest in our common priorities through European programmes. And honourable members, I'm always keen to ensure that this House has its full say on crucial decisions of our Union. My proposal to invest these funds via programmes in our European budget achieves exactly that. Next Generation EU will restore and rebuild our single market, that great generator of innovation, prosperity and opportunity. All member states need to invest in technologies that will spark the recovery through new innovation and clean industries. Next Generation EU strengthens the European Green Deal and Horizon Europe and will invest in key infrastructure from 5G to housing renovation. At the same time, we must ensure that the transition to a climate-neutral economy leaves nobody behind. Next Generation EU will therefore multiply the funding for the Just Transition Fund. And in the same vein, no member state should have to choose between responding to the crisis or investing in our people. Therefore, Next Generation EU increases Erasmus and youth employment support. It makes sure that people get the skills and the training and the education they need to adapt to this rapidly changing world. Next Generation EU will help those perfectly healthy companies that have made the right decisions and investment over decades, but that find themselves at risk now because competitors in other member states have better access to public or private money to get fresh capital. It will invest in key European industries and technologies to make crucial supply chains more resilient. It will ensure Europe remains cutting edge in key areas like artificial intelligence, precision farming or green engineering. And Next Generation EU will help make our health systems more resilient for future crises. This investment will be a new European common good. It will show the true and tangible value of being part of the Union. And it will be owned by us all. In total, the Commission will raise €750 billion for Next Generation EU. Of that total, 500 billion will be distributed in grants and 250 billion in loans passed on to member states. Meine Damen und Herren Abgeordnete.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me be clear. These grants are a common investment in our future. Given the debts of the past in member states, these have nothing to do with this. These will go through the European budget, and that will limit and restrict the amount that any member state would have to pay. These are labelled as investments in our priorities, in strengthening the single market, in digitalisation, in the European Green Deal, in resilience, and even more. The European budget has always been made up of grants. This is nothing new. Grants for specific investment, grants for increased cohesion, grants to improve cohesion in social and economic areas. And the fact that this has worked proves that this can work as well. The competitiveness of the European Union and living standards is equal to everybody in the member states. The member states have seen all of their purchasing power increase. And so this will multiply prosperity for everybody in the way that Next Generation EU will. We're investing jointly in Europe's future, and we will have a very specific and well-defined way of paying this back in future. Over and above this, the Commission will also make sure that there will be a new range of own resources. These could, for example, be worked on extending the carbon tax, or looking at dangerous products that harm the environment coming from outside the EU, or a new digital tax where millions of euros in profits are being made. We can draw on that to pay into the common funds. We need to be ambitious, and I count on your full support on this.
Meine Damen und Herren,
Ladies and gentlemen, it's high time to take the right decision. Those who today will set aside these ambitious investments, then I would say to them, the cost of not investing in this crisis will come back manifold in the future. It's a question of laying the foundations for our common future now, and also defining very clearly how in future we can exit crisis situations and not be indebted by them. So let us leave these old prejudices to one side. Instead of that, let us rediscover the power that comes from this joint and common goal of getting out of this crisis. Of course, we're under great pressure, but just as great is the opportunity for Europe and taking our responsibility to do the right thing in this situation. We can set down the foundations for a climate-neutral Europe, a digital Europe, a more resilient Europe, a more social Europe that is even better than it has been before. 70 years ago, under the names of our founding fathers and mothers, they took the first step towards a Europe of peace, a union of prosperity. They created that step. Today is now to look at adding our chapter to that story, to take a further bold step to a union of sustainability. We owe this to the next generation. Long live Europe.
Maria, qual è? Grazie.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Before we hear the group leaders, I would like to say to those MEPs who have been asked to leave their seats for safety and security reasons to please respect this. You cannot be there, there in seat 36. You've already been told twice, sir, so please respect what you're told. Mr. Manfred Weber, you have the floor.
Mr. President, Madam President, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, solidarity is back. European solidarity is back. The spirit of Robert Schuman is back. European flags burned a few weeks ago on the streets in Italy, for example. Millions of people inside of the European Union are still concerned, even afraid about the future, about the job, about their families. And Europe is giving today a strong answer. You are not alone. We together will pick up the challenge and give a good answer with the fundament of solidarity. We open even a new chapter for the European Union. Dear colleagues, some call it as an Hamilton moment, the current situation. Frankly speaking, as an EPP politician, I don't like it, because I don't want to see Europe argued, Europe based on making debts, on borrowing money. That is not my dream about Europe. But having the situation in mind, the economic crisis in mind, the middle of the biggest economic crisis since the Second World War, we see no alternative as to invest now, to give our economy a new boost. And the key question for us is not, first of all, how massive the investment will be. How much money do we spend? That is not the first question for us. The first question is, what is it for? And one of our principles is, and that is guaranteed now with the proposal, we guarantee that we are not having fresh money for the old problems of the continent. We have to guarantee that we use fresh money for the new ideas, for the fresh future for this continent. Another element which was crucial for us in the debates and the preparatory process was the democratic procedures. And I thank the Commission President for the clear statement. Now we have to go to the Council and also clarify with the Council that the principle that no money can be spent at European level without the approval of the European Parliament is also guaranteed from the Council side. The proposal is now on the table and, dear colleagues, we have still to argue, to convince. 27 member states' parliaments are needed to support this general idea. And it's funny to see that in my camp, in the EPP, we have one government, we have two socialist governments, we have one liberal government in the Netherlands. And even the Greens are part of the problem this time, because in Austria they are governing. So it's really good to see that all of us, we have the same challenge now to convince the others to support the general idea. That is still in front of us. And to the Frugal Four, let me be clear with three main arguments. First of all, our companies or your companies cannot be successful without a successful single market. So it's in your interest to make the whole European Union successful. The second argument is we see a redistribution of the global economic power going on. And I don't want to see that China is a big winner and Europe is a big loser. And the third argument is in 2008, 9, 10, we had faced the phenomenon of a lost generation, and Europe cannot accept another lost generation in this time, in this crisis. That's why I think we have good arguments for convincing them. For us, solidarity goes always hand in hand with responsibility. That is always two sides of the same coin for us as EPP. And having this in mind, I tell you that when we go to the markets now, borrow money, we have to be clear to have a full and strong and serious idea, honest idea, how to pay it back. And to say that in the next MFF, having the debates in March in mind, when the Council tried already to find a common understanding about the MFF of today, I don't believe that this will be so easy. That's why, as EPP, let's be honest, let's be clear, and that means we need own resources for paying back the debt we have now installed. The big winner of the crisis are the digital giants, and that's why I think it's fair to ask the digital giants to pay part of the debt we are creating now. And another part of this solidarity, responsibility, is for us also the national perspective. You can call it semester, you can call it the need of internal reforms. I think it is simply fair, if you ask your neighbour to help you to practice solidarity, it's simply fair to do your homework, to be better prepared for the future. And in a globalised world, we need still reforms. There are thousands of other principles which are important. Rule of law, a key issue. EPP supports this. The grants loan debate, I think we have now a good compromise on the table. The health programme is upgraded, a big signal, important signal in today's corona time. And the MFF, there we will still have further discussions when it is about agriculture and cohesion. So the plan goes in a good direction. It's an important moment for the future of the European Union, and the EPP will generally support the ideas from the Commission. Thank you so much.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Garcia Perez, Irache, please go ahead. Thank you very much, President. Mrs. von der Leyen, 1 month after the European Parliament adopted a resolution, you are here presenting the European Commission's recovery plan. And I must say it's an ambitious plan, it is a pro-European plan, and is a plan that is going along the lines of what we suggested. And thank you very much for giving the European Parliament the role that it deserves, putting us on an equal footing with the Council, making sure that this recovery plan is within the MEPs and the resources that you referred to. Secondly, we have community debt, the issuance of bonds by the European Commission that will allow member states to get fair financing to extricate themselves from this crisis. It is clear that something has changed. Some of the proposals that you put forward and that have been supported by some member states would have been unthinkable a few weeks ago. So many member states understand how much is at stake. Let me tell you what is at stake. The future and the credibility of the EU project. It's not just about solidarity. It's about the survival of the euro and the single market. And it's also about the survival of the European project, because perhaps some haven't understood that we're not here to haggle, at least my political group isn't here for that. It's here to have a political union. Some are talking in the Council as if nothing had happened, as if we hadn't had this huge crisis in the last few months, as if we hadn't had these millions of deaths. We're talking about 60 million jobs that were in jeopardy, as if we didn't know that this crisis is going to lead to a terrible crisis with the EU economy shrinking 8% this year. So if this isn't pushing us to act, then I don't know what some are waiting for. It is the moment of truth. The time has come to put our cards on the table. We want to continue building a political union because this goes beyond solidarity and because we must assume that in this chaotic world it is worthwhile defending the EU. COVID is a symmetrical crisis with asymmetrical impact. The EU has to correct these asymmetries. We have to look at that. But what is not acceptable is to say that we want a common project, but we let some member states aid their businesses, while other businesses in other member states are left to die off because of a lack of resources. So either we all make it or no one makes it. And if there are those in the Council who don't believe in European solutions and convergence, then what they should do is at least stand back and not halt those who want to move forward in Europe. Let us be frank, it's not about throwing more money at this, it's about making progress on a European level, and that is why the Council should change the procedure necessary so that we can adopt the MFF by QMV and not unanimity. We have 23 pro-European countries, and yet they are held hostage by 4 countries who prefer national solutions. This shows a complete lack of solidarity. This is so short-sighted. It's short-sighted because all you need to do is look around and to realize that multilateralism is at risk and we need global governance. The time has come to strengthen our social pillar and protect those who most need it. That is why I'm thrilled that you have the child guarantee in this fund and plan. It is our obligation to show solidarity to future generations. We have to invest in the green and digital transformation. We cannot put an end to biodiversity and damage the environment and put huge debts on the shoulders of future generations. That is why, Mrs. von der Leyen, you have to stick to this European semester. We have to look at the issue of fiscal consolidation. We cannot put conditions that will lead to pensions being cut. We need environmental sustainability and social sustainability. The future that we're building together has to be backed by protecting the rule of law and backing the rule of law. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to assume our responsibility. Mrs. von der Leyen, you have just seen that the European Parliament is an institution that wants to work in the interest of citizens. Now it is your task to convince our friends in the Council. Stand firm, be ambitious, and we will stand by your side. We owe it to the future generations of the EU. Thank you very much. Mr. Cholos, Dacian.
Thank you, President, dear colleagues. This health and economic crisis we face is a game changer, unprecedented in the history of the European Union. The magnitude of this crisis and its extraordinary challenges require a sizable and rapid response. There is no alternative. Either we find a solution to invest massively in our economy, or we accept that we will be hit even harder. Let me be clear. This is a package for all member states, and all member states need this package, irrespective of how bad they were affected by the health of economic crisis, because the internal market is at stake. If the internal market fails, every citizen and businesses in the European Union will suffer. The solution by President von der Leyen for the Commission to borrow money from the market is a remarkable one, we have to recognise. Our opinion may differ on some details, but I really welcome the approach, a European solution for a European problem. It also avoids the major difficulty we had during this last crisis, creating more debt for some member states when in fact they need money to inject immediately in their economies. Decisions that we take now will define Europeans' road for the next 20, 30 years, because we invest massively now, not only to recover, but to relaunch and to modernize our economy. So we are creating depth for the generations to come. And that is why MFF and recovery package should focus on the future, not stay fixed on ideas from the past. First, we need to restore economic perspectives. We need to safeguard and create new jobs. We need to focus on investment with real economic and European added value. The Green Deal and digital agenda should be the building blocks of a resilient and sovereign European economy. Second, solidarity is key. The fight against territorial divides and inequalities across Europe will be the breeding ground for our Union or the seeds of our future division. So that's why we must stand united. Third, the European Union is not a cash machine. It's a common project where solidarity comes with values and a shared vision for our future. And that's why Renew Europe Group will only support MFF where rule of law and respect of European values are a condition to receiving European funds. Not to penalise people, but the politicians who do not play by the rules. Fourth, certainly there are many lessons to be learned from this crisis, reasons to reform and improve areas where the European Union needs to be more present. And that is why the conference on the future of Europe, our common future, should get underway. The road to recovery will be long and hard. The decision we take these days will affect the future of millions of people, the future of the internal market and the future of our European Union. And that is why the European Union must stay united and fight as one. Thank you.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cholos. The next speaker is Mr. Meuthen on behalf of the ID Group.
Herr Präsident, Frau Kommissionspräsidentin.
President, Commission President, I think Chancellor Merkel was very clear when she said that there wouldn't be any Corona bonds or Euro bonds, but now we have this recovery fund providing grants of 500 million euros. We have taxpayers who are financing this money on behalf of the European Commission without any proper legal basis. So this doesn't really seem to bother anybody, though. And then you, Commission President, come here supporting this nonsense, saying it's not enough and you want 500 billion more. Let me say, this is completely wrong. This is nonsense. This is a huge price for EU citizens to have to pay. So you're just spending as if there were no tomorrow with taxpayers' money. This is completely lacking any responsibility or economic sense here. This just doesn't make sense in terms of the spending or the taxes. We're talking about huge figures of money here. This is just a completely absurd perspective and hypocritical as well, all in the name of solidarity. We have seen Austria, Netherlands, Denmark and Sweden who refuse to agree to this nonsense. Thank you.
Grazie. Presidente.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Keller.
Thank you very much. We have indeed a very deep crisis in Europe and we need to react to that. And I think it's a big moment of responsibility, of thinking together, that we're joining hands and we're thinking of how to get together out of this crisis. In this Parliament, with a broad majority, has shown a way forward with a substantial recovery fund, a strong MFF, a strong budget, and a Green Deal that helps the economy while addressing the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, which have gone nowhere. And I'm very glad to say that Greens all over Europe are actually supporting that. So I'm afraid, Mr. Weber, dear Manfred, that it's a bit cheap to hide behind the Greens when we actually have a strong support, also public support, from the Austrian Greens who are supporting our position and the position of this Parliament. Maybe it's rather your best friend in Vienna who is causing the problem, but I'm glad to see that you're also ready and willing to convince him and try to convince him, and I'm glad we can join forces there and try indeed our common job to convince governments all over, parties all over, because that is what we need to do now. Because I do believe that the Commission proposal is a very big step forward, and we welcome the focus that you've put on grants to make sure that no member state is left behind in this crisis. The overall volume might not prove sufficient in time, but in any case, what we need to make sure is that we don't lessen the ambitions on the MFF, because we also need to think further ahead. You have mentioned, colleagues have mentioned, conditions attached to the fund. And I would urge us all to not repeat the big mistakes of the past and force countries into austerity and blind market ideologies that have never worked and will not work. Instead, we need to make sure that the money is well invested into projects that will help in the long term, that create jobs and that save the one planet that we have. And to be meaningful in the long term, both the Recovery Fund and the MFF need to incentivise the social and ecological transformation of our economy and promote gender equality, a big problem we've seen in this crisis. And they also need to follow our minimum common rules, such as the rule of law and democracy. Some governments think that they can do it all alone, but I think they should think again. They have all benefited as much as, and even more than other member states, from the single market, from freedom of movement, and some, unfortunately, also from a bit too lax tax rules. And dear colleagues, Europe needs a strong step ahead. It needs courageous action like that of Schuman 70 years ago. And this Parliament has shown it's ready to do its part. I hope the Member States will follow. Thank you.
Grazie, Presidente Keller.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Keller. Mr. van der Overveld, Jan, on behalf of the ECR.
Collega's.
President, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very impressed the way in which our citizens and businesses have managed to deal with this very deep and crisis. And I think our measures need to be efficient as well. That means if we're going to allow loans and grants, there must be very clear conditions linked to these so that the money will be received where it's most needed. I have to also say that there are all sorts of measures that could be taken that don't actually cost money. Strengthening the internal market is an absolute necessity in this crisis, and we have to make sure that our fabric of businesses is maintained. International groups are managing to put together enormous sums of money. They don't always have the best intentions, so we have to have safety mechanisms in place. Now, we need to look at the way money is going to be paid out, but also we need to see how it's going to be financed as well. And I think it's extremely important from the point of view of society that the people who are working and are saving should not have to fork out for these financing programs. Of course, we also need to look at the way in which we're funding this and how the ECB is involved. Some are suffering under the illusion that there's endless amounts of money, but that's not the case. I think if that were the case, we'd see very quickly problems coming up. Now, I think we also need to look at putting aside one of our big bugbears, the issue of big companies paying money, digital companies. They're paying far too little. They should be paying more. It needs to be done in an efficient way, OECD fashion, for example, if possible, but I'm pleased that the EU's taken advance here.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Aubry. Thank you very much. Mrs. von der Leyen, for months now, we warned you that this crisis isn't just a period in between brackets. It is to be found rooted in an economic approach that had destroyed our industrial fabric, our social protection, and our healthcare systems. You've been talking about generations and a generational pact, and I am part of this generation that has borne the brunt of the liberal policies of the EU that have increased inequalities and have destroyed the planet. The recovery plan that you unveiled today should have completely drawn a line under what has been done in the past. But that isn't the case. You are saying that austerity is behind us, suspending budgetary scrutiny at the beginning, but now it seems it's going to come back through the back door with the European semester and the strings attached to the money that is going to be given to the member states. And we already heard what the right has had to say. And what is this going to lead to? To more austerity. Yes. Now, of course, we would like to congratulate you for creating a plastics tax or a carbon tax, which have praiseworthy environmental goals, but will also lighten the burden of the member states. So we're pleased with that. But how can we accept that you don't want to tax the extremely wealthy or those who have really profited from the crisis, including big supermarkets whose profits have gone up 35%. Now, those states most affected by the crisis should get more support, or that's what you're saying. But let's be frank, this isn't going to change the overall equation. It's always going to be the member states that will foot most of the bill, and therefore it's going to fall on the shoulders of the European people. Now, 750 billion for the recovery fund, that's fine, but that's only 1/3 of what the European Parliament asked for across the political spectrum last week. So we have an extra 500 billion that will be grants, direct grants. You didn't tell us how much you're expected to get from own resources, so I don't think these own resources will be enough to fund these 500 billion in grants. So it probably means that the member states will have to incur more debt. And how ironic that you're calling this the Next Generation EU Fund when you're going to be asking precisely the new generation to shoulder the burden of this extra debt. So your plan is hiding a key tool that could have avoided this debt, and that's cancelling debt and the possibility of the ECB offering direct loans to the member states to protect them from speculators. Let us help member states get rid of this debt so that we can democratically and calmly take the right path in order to fight against climate change and inequalities in our society. Because it is absurd to talk about budget balance and other issues without knowing what direction we want to take. For us, it's clear. Not a single euro of public money should be used to get rid of jobs, such as is happening with Renault. And we can't have a system that is focus on production be put on a drip. And then there's greenwashing as well. And greenwashing is something that was done by your generation and previous generations. We need to look at social conditions, economic, environmental conditions. There's the whole issue of environmental reconversion. The group of the European United Left is putting forward this alternative route out of the crisis. We need a radical overhaul of our model in order to exit the crisis and in order to make sure that our society will become resilient to future shocks and crises. Thank you very much. Mrs. Adinolfi, on behalf of the non-attached. Ladies and gentlemen, up to now, what we've been hearing is that there are ideas that give us hope. The fact that there are more grants than loans, than European debt issuance that will be long dated, that's and that will help us towards a green and digital transition that we've been clamoring for a long time. But it is now that the challenge begins, and then we'll see how the game will be played out in Council, where some countries will want to continue with austerity policies. Don't call these countries frugal countries. Call them selfish countries. Prime Minister Conte unveiled a strategic plan that looks at the future, looks at the budget and investment. The five-star movement wants substantial support from the EU, and let us hope that the plan you have just unveiled will help us with that. For decades, the EU has refused to change its modus operandi, and only a crisis such as this has made us realize what really counts, the spirit of European solidarity. Are we writing in the history books? Let's hope so, and let's hope that this is a real turning point for this old but resilient continent.
Olfi.
Thank you, Mrs. Adinolfi. I'm really sorry, but we really have to make sure that we respect physical distancing rules. This is compulsory. So I'm very sorry, but the ushers will come and tell you when something isn't being done properly. We have 2 rooms that have enough space for all those MEPs that want to follow plenary. And, of course, it makes sense for the speakers to be here in the hemicycle. Mr. Mureşan, you have the floor for 2 minutes.
Mr. President, President von der Leyen, welcome to the European Parliament and thank you for your proposal. Dear colleagues, today is an important day because the citizens of Europe expect help and support from the European Union, and today we can tell them help is coming. We are creating a package the European Union is delivering. This is a new instrument. The support which it grants will be concrete. It will make a difference for people, for companies, for regions and for countries. What are the next steps? Today is only the beginning. We need to create the best recovery package possible, and for this the European Parliament needs to be fully involved in this recovery package. The colleagues here in the room, they are coming from all regions of Europe. They are in direct and in permanent contact with the citizens. They know exactly what the needs on the ground are, what hospitals need, what companies need, what people need. And this is why we say the European Parliament has to be fully involved in how the money of the recovery package is being spent, but also in how the money of the recovery package is being paid back. The involvement of the European Parliament will ensure that the recovery package is the best recovery package that we can jointly and together create. This recovery package will have an impact upon the future of the citizens, and this is why this House, which represents the citizens of the European Union, needs to be involved in all aspects. And dear colleagues, we also need to see the whole picture. President von der Leyen was speaking about the budget as a whole. We need to create a recovery package which supports the people and the economy to come out of the corona crisis. But we should also not forget about the old priorities of the EU budget. We should not forget about farmers, about students. We should not forget our new priorities, the Green Deal, the security of citizens, digitalization, and we should have enough reserves to respond to still unpredictable crises that will for sure occur in the next 7 years. These are the principles of our work. We are ready to work with the European Commission on this basis, and we expect the Commission to work with the Parliament on this basis. Thank you very much.
Grazie, onorevole Benifei.
Thank you very much, Mr. Benifei. 1 minute. Thank you very much, President. Madam President, the world is looking at us today. It is looking at us to see whether our union, founding on the rule of law, a unique welfare state, the result of decades of social struggle, is in a position to survive the current crisis. Your proposal is ambitious and finally seems to provide answers commensurate with the challenges. We will look at it in detail. €750 billion with a huge share disbursed as grants. Finally, a solution to the emergency that the European Parliament talked about. It shows common solidarity, and we've been clamouring for this in this chamber for a long time. I'd like to repeat what Mr. Sassoli said. We will support these efforts as long as you remain ambitious. So the member state governments have to follow through. There is a real need to back a new EU generation. So we need to act swiftly, and is straightforward manner, because Europeans can no longer wait. Mrs. Hayet.
Thank you very much, President. Thank you, colleagues. I think this proposal is a major step forward for us, but let me be quite frank here. We are still wondering where the money is going to come from to finance this recovery. It's with Google, Amazon, Facebook. This money is with all these multinational companies that practice tax optimization. So we need to have a tax to finance this. All the major companies that are polluting, we need to have the courage of our convictions and use this tool, which is own resources. We need to do that now and not in 2024. Once we have this money, we'll be able to give fresh impetus to our project, cars running on clean energy, properly isolated homes, a return for delocalized companies. Ladies and gentlemen, this virus does not only lead to death, it leads to despair. So we need to meet the expectations of our citizens in Europe. Thank you very much for this proposal. You know our additional requests.
Mr. Panza, 1 minute.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, President von der Leyen. I've taken note of the fact that you've come to unveil what was talked about by Mr. Macron and Mrs. Merkel last week, which shows that the European Commission is supporting what the French and German couple are doing. Now, we Italians with the Conte government have seen so much ambition but very few facts. So many people are unemployed, so I feel rather diffident and don't really trust this. To finance the recovery fund, there will be new taxes that will inevitably be a burden for consumers and SMEs, making the crisis that you want to fight even worse. I haven't heard you mention sectors that aren't considered to be strategic but that are vital for certain countries, such as tourism, just to mention one. And we're extremely worried about the whole schedule. How will everyone agree? Will the Dutch agree above all? And will this happen soon? But in the meantime, the EU economy is dying either because of bureaucratic inertia or the coronavirus. But then you blame the populists. We're only sowing what you reap.
Grazie. Onorevole Eickhout, prego.
Thank you very much. Mr. Eickhout.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first of all, I would like to thank the Commission for its proposal, because this is creating a room for an investment plan, and an investment plan that Europe badly needs and should also come from Europe, not only from the Member States. Because we do know if we leave it to the Member States, we will get an unbalance, an imbalance that is bigger and bigger in this internal market, what we see already. Half of the state aid is coming from Germany at the moment, just showing the imbalance. And that is why we need a European investment programme. And that is why this is so important. I would like to thank you for that. It's really also being thanked by all the different political greens. And we do hope that from the other political families, including my government in the Netherlands, that they are seeing how badly needed such a new modern investment programme is needed. But this for the Commission also means that we need to be sure that the investments are going to the Green Deal and digitalisation. And that is there in words. But really, it now boils down also to how to put it into action. And there I have one question to the Commission. We are talking about 750 billion now. But in state aid, we are talking about more than 2,000 billion. And there still the support is unconditioned. European Commission, Madam Vestager, make the rules to also condition the state aid, because conditions need here, but also for the national investments, and then we can prosper and get to the new economy that Europe so badly needs. Thank you very much.
Grazie. Onorevole Szydło.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Szydło, 1 minute.
Panie Przewodniczący, Szanowni Państwo.
President, ladies and gentlemen, Europe today needs solidarity, and Europeans need hope. I can note with satisfaction what we've just heard from President von der Leyen, who said that this fund will now be stocked up. Now, obviously, we need to look more closely at the details. We know that own resources need to be increased, but this is a good time to start the fight against tax evasion and tax fraud. Madam President, I noted that you said that stereotypes should be left to one side. And I believe in that very deeply, and I hope that the European Union will now be guided by the rules of the treaty, and that they will show solidarity, that they will take into consideration the differences in all the member states, and they will deal with everybody according to their needs. Europeans today need hope, and they need work, and we have an obligation to give it to them.
Prego,
Martin Gyongyosi, 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Regardless of substance, it is quite appalling that the European Union once again, in such a critical time, hammers out a deal behind closed doors. Everyone that criticizes the European Union for a lack of transparency is quite right. And I think if the EU wants to appear democratic, it better start acting like it. I can only hope that, unlike the last Merkel-Macron deal back in June 2018 about the fiscal union, this deal will fare much better. That one vanished into thin air, and we haven't heard anything of it since its announcement and declaration. I can only hope that this package will deliver, however, I have certain concerns. I am concerned that this 500 billion fund is not acting like a Eurobond. It is not going to transfer debt from member states to the level of the European Union, and it is only going to add to the unbearable debt level of certain member states, which will bring about austerity in the upcoming years, which will be crushing for these economies. Also, I can only hope and see that I will see guarantees in this recovery package that the funds don't go to the big multinational companies and corporations, but to SMEs, small and medium-sized companies, which are the backbone of the European economy. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole.
Thank you very much. Mrs. De Lange, 2 minutes.
Ja, dank u wel.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioners.
Laat me in het Nederlands beginnen.
I'll start in Dutch, because I think this is important. I'd like to welcome the proposal from the Commission. In previous crises, Europe has waited too long before reacting, so I'm very pleased that this is now on the table. Also, people have talked about the relation between grants and loans, the relation between them, the firepower, but the fact that it's on the table is something I can welcome. And also the idea that we're in the same boat, so let us put our shoulders to the wheel together to achieve an outcome. This may stand and fall by own resources. Digital tax is something that a lot of people have mentioned. I can welcome that, and also the ETS. But the core point, as far as I'm concerned, is that the money be spent well. My concern...
We're now entering into debt that is unavoidable in this crisis, but it's unclear how and when it is going to be repaid. And my concern is that if we don't get own resources, because if one member state opposes, we won't get them, that then in the end we will have to use our European budget to actually repay this debt, having less money at our disposal to do actual politics and policies. And therefore, I would like to see a real commitment from Council that we get own resources in time, or that we start a repayment plan within this MFF already. We need clarity for this programme to work. And then let me say one thing to Madame Garcia Perez. I've just said in Dutch, my mother tongue, because I think it's important, that we need to shoulder this proposal all together, that we're all in the same boat and that we need to work together. But if you propose making this a matter of 23 against 4, we won't succeed. You will push those 4 countries in the arms of the extreme right if you say, let's do this without unanimity. Count on the pro-European forces in those countries, among which I include myself, to get this done, but we will have to do it together. Thank you very much.
Grazie, onorevole Geier.
Thank you very much. Jens Geier, 1 minute.
Danke, Herr Präsident, liebe Kolleginnen und
Thank you, President. Colleagues, President von der Leyen. Let me just send you a warm thank you, first of all, for coming here and for presenting the plan of the European Executive. I think this is very important for democracy, so we appreciate this gesture of you coming here to Parliament. I would also like to thank the Commission for the proposal that has been made. I think it is appropriate in terms of the scope and the ambition, but I am a little bit disappointed about the lack of ambition when it comes to own resources. So we have a number of good proposals that we all know that have been discussed previously. But I think when we look at prior discussions, there might have been a little bit more room for manoeuvre in Council. So perhaps you could have been a bit clearer about what own resources you prefer, which you think are best, which you will definitively propose. You know you have a lot of support in Parliament in terms of own resources. And it would be interesting to know exactly what the stumbling blocks there. I think it's also interesting to think about where the money is going to go. I think the priorities need to be clearer. We're talking about innovation, digitalisation, strengthening social security systems, amongst others, but we don't really have enough detail there. Thank you.
Onorevole Garicano.
Thank you. Mr. Garicano. Luis, you have 1 minute. Thank you, President. Finally, Europeans are being given a chance to leave their homes very cautiously. We have been responsible and the health situation is getting better, but the economic situation is dire. People don't know whether they'll be able to make ends meet, whether there'll be a job for them. There are millions of Europeans who fear for their future. Commissioners, we're very pleased that the European Commission has taken on board what the European Parliament said a few weeks ago. There will be Commission common debt issuance to help exit the crisis. But I would like to appeal to your sense of responsibility and to the sense of responsibility of the Member States. This plan is urgent. Every day that goes by, more than 2,000 businesses are closing shop forever in my country. Every day that we engage in sterile discussions, there will be more jobs lost and more lives destroyed. Let us act and let us make sure that this plan will become a reality. The Europeans are looking to us and we mustn't disappoint them. It is the future of the EU which is at stake.
Honorable Juvin.
Thank you very much. Mr. Juvin, 1 minute.
President, thank you very much. 540 billion euros. That is a block to be chained to the foot of a future generation. Now, we talk about what we can achieve here. Now, the health crisis shouldn't be exploited to advance a federalist agenda with a European tax, with a European governance plans to move away from unanimity. But we fear even more that this is an impossible dream of going back to the world as was. No, that's not going to happen. We have to work in a world where the future generations may experience once again a health collapse in this way. It's only that we can look at that and then work on going beyond free trade, working with legality, having preference for local products that should hold sway. Basically, the world we will see in future will be one where we stop talking about eternal growth and not preparing for the crisis that we're dealing with and the social and economic collapse that we might see otherwise.
Thank
you, Mr. Carême. Madam President, there has to be European solidarity in the face of unprecedented crisis. So the decisions taken are welcome. I think that this would have been a historic moment, a historic plan, if it had been more ambitious. And if we really wanted to go down the path of transforming our environment and our economy, doing away with the risk of going back to old habits, I think that the plan falls short of what we need to give our citizens some breathing space and to help us respect the Paris Accord and to stop the sixth extinction of species. I prefer action to lofty words. You said yourselves, inaction will cost us a lot more. So why aren't we doing more for the environment? We're dying because of polluted air. We are dying because of what we're eating. It's poisoning us. And what future are we choosing for the future? Let us listen to climate experts oncologist, cancer expert, and so on. This crisis is historic, and our response has to be equally historic. Thank you.
Onorevole Epping.
Thank you, Mr. Epping.
Thank you very much, President. The European Commission's proposal is a coup. It's not about corona. It's about getting power in Brussels and in the Eurozone. We are on the brink of a transfer union that is irreversible, where part of Europe will take the money hostage from the other part. Mrs. von der Leyen, you haven't achieved this yet. Vetoes can be possible from 27 member states. If we're looking at the level of the MFF on new European taxes, well, I hear that the CDA in the European Parliament is in favour, and on amassed debts by the Commission, which runs counter to Article 311 of the treaty. The EU is Icarus on its way to the sun, and we're going to stop this. There's a ratification process that has to be undergone with 27 member states, more than 50 parliaments. We're going to take the debate to people who are going to have to pay for this, and we're going to call on German professors to go to the Constitutional Court in Germany to stop this. I'd do it, but I can't because I'm not German.
Mr. Preachman, 1 minute.
Europe is defined as a political project by the answer it gives to its crisis. Many citizens have bad memories about how we managed the last financial crisis. They were made guilty of the excesses of their governments and the incompetence in planning economic and industrial change. We cannot allow this to happen again. We must take this opportunity for Europe through Next Generation EU to work more directly with citizens and enterprises, to really overcome national frontiers, to empower a network of regions and metropolitan areas that can be effective, quick to react and close to the people. We must choose. And Europe as an enormous manager of some obsolete states unable to deal with the future, or and Europe as a cooperative of citizens equal in rights and freedoms that brings back to the people returns in terms of social, cultural and democratic progress. Next Generation EU is a first step. Go ahead without hesitation.
Grazie, onorevole González Pons.
Thank you, Mr. González Pons.
We are facing a decisive moment. We have to be ambitious, otherwise we will not survive. This plan with 750 billion euros the Commission is presenting is ambitious, and so it gives us a source of hope. Nevertheless, there is still a lot to be done. Parliament needs to be fully involved in designing the recovery plan. We have this Marshall economic plan, but now we need a Marshall democratic plan. We need to maintain the rule of law and our values as strongly as we defend our currency. We need to have guarantees that this fund will be distributed in a fair and equitable way, that it will really get to the citizens, that the millions and millions of euros that have been announced will actually be realised. Citizens need to believe us when we say the word billions. Too often in the past, this has meant absolutely nothing to them. Thirdly, it is urgent that this fund be available as soon as possible. Millions and millions of people in Europe simply cannot wait. Bankruptcy is killing more than this virus. We cannot do this at the cost of reducing the European budget. It's not about different needs, it's more needs. Also, we cannot use this fund to paper over the policies from bad governments. We cannot, if we give any air to populism, it will simply continue to grow. We need to be fair. We're talking about 27 member states. This money doesn't come from a magic money tree. It has to come from the citizens. So we need to think of the citizens and not the governments. What we need is the social state to really show its strength here. This cannot be allowed to compromise the next MFF in any way. National parliaments will have to adopt this plan. And I conclude, the economy isn't just based on numbers, it's based on trust. We're talking about human beings here. We're talking about the lives of all of our citizens, not the politicians who govern us. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fernandez. Jonas, you have 1 minute. Thank you very much, President. This is a historic day because it could be the beginning of transcendental and unequivocal change in the building of the European project. A similar change to the introduction of the euro. The joint debt issuance constitutes a huge change in the economic and social makeup of the EU. We have been working towards this for decades, and today we have the European Commission unveiling a plan that is pointing in that direction. I think that this recovery fund plan is reasonable. It's robust. Of course, we have to delve into more details because we haven't been given the time to know the ins and outs, but I would like to take advantage of the opportunity to ask the Council and the members of the European Parliament to make an additional effort to take the historic step which will benefit all Europeans. Thank you.
Next speaker is Mr. Asmani. 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, in the midst of this unprecedented health crisis, no one is left untouched. People are falling ill, losing loved ones, seeing their businesses suffer and losing their jobs. It's a cause for people to reflect, to question what is really important and what should our priorities be. In the same way, we should re-evaluate the European budget. Facing this crisis and knowing we still have other challenges to address. People look to us for a unified response, to invest money wisely, be accountable, and not to pass the burden to the new future generations. To achieve this, we need to prioritise what is important. We should ask ourselves, how can we refocus and reform our economies to come out of this crisis stronger, but together? Just like our citizens trying to adapt in this crisis, we need to adapt so we can recover and build a renewed resilience. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mr. Haider for 1 minute. Thank you very much, President. While Europe is spending all this money, people are wondering what is going to happen. They are scared for their very existence. And during this time, the European Parliament is spending a good few thousand euros to have this meeting. And what's this meeting about? It's not a budget debate. That budget debate isn't even here. It's not on the table. It's a ghost budget. It's just about having a completely clueless President of the Commission and giving her somewhere to speak, giving her a stage. And we've heard this from Ms van der Leyen, that thousands and thousands of euros is being wasted during the most serious crisis we've seen. So the debt union is going to be achieved by shifting debt from north to the south, and the dream of all Eurocrats that there'll be their own EU taxes and the national parliaments will be deprived of their sovereignty. That's what they want. They don't want to fight the crisis. They want to exploit the crisis in order to achieve their goal of a Brussels reign superstate. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Urtasun for 1 minute.
Sí, gracias. Este es un paquete.
Thank you very much. This is something which is very relevant when it comes to integration of the Eurozone, and it sends a message to our citizens that we're working together to face this crisis together. Obviously, we would have liked an even bigger package with an even bigger economic impact. We think this is probably the absolute minimum to save the Eurozone and to save the single market. I have a very clear message for the Commission and Council. We cannot hold hostage the future of millions of our citizens based on 4 governments that simply can't live up to the ambitions of this moment. So let me just make 3 points which I think are very important. First of all, the digital transition, the environmental transition, those that are still very much affected by the previous crisis. We need to have a more democratic reform system. We can't simply have these technocratic proposals that don't go via Parliament. And thirdly, we don't need antisocial policies or those that are based on austerity that did so much damage in the past. What we want is a useful tool for the future of our citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Fisantz for 1 minute.
Thank you. After weeks, even months, we finally have something in black and white, but not everything that glitters is gold. There are a lot of problems. First of all, yes, we have 500 billion in grants, but that's not enough. And then, of course, the time period. We need this immediately for 2020 and 2021. To have an instrument over 7 years isn't going to help us respond to the crisis. And then what about who will benefit? Often you are thinking as you were before the virus, as if it hadn't happened. And then the whole issue of reforms. Brussels is telling member states what reforms to carry out. And then, of course, we now have new European taxes. But we must make sure that SMEs don't have more taxes to pay and more of a burden. And I can assure you that we'll be hot on your heels if you do this.
Next speaker is Ms. Regner for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, President. We have the Commission's proposal now, and it's clear the only proposal is based on more solidarity, on more Europe. No country can be an island here. I think we need to make sure that the more selfish 4 countries do not get in the way of this, and Austria is part of those 4. We cannot have this small state mentality. Europe will succeed together or fail. We have to remember what the motto of the Austrian presidency was, a Europe that protects. And it should be a Europe that protects young people, that protects women that are particularly hard hit by this crisis. We should remember the commitment that we made last year. We need to protect all of these people. And half of these funds are earmarked for women. This makes up half of the population. We should make sure that they benefit from half of these funds because they are particularly affected by this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Finally, Gerald van der Mans for 1 minute. Thank you very much, Madam President. Well, you all saw, if you turn around in the plenary, during the night of the lockdown, an illogical minister of Brussels was driving down the Rue de la Loire. You know, we're talking about this because of Corona, but what I'm saying is politicians in power are abusing the Corona crisis, and this is happening across the board. All these federalist dreams, these centralist dreams have been trotted out again, mutualisation of debt, about the taxation raised by the EU itself. It's basically overnight, through the virus, this has been slipped in through the back door. Ms von der Leyen has said that Corona is Europe's moment. Well, maybe for her and for the elite here, it's Europe's moment. But for the European peoples, this is a dark moment. This is a dark moment indeed. This is a brutal attack on the population, and that's what I regret here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now for the Commission, Vice President Šefčovič.
Thank you very much, Madam President, honourable members of the European Parliament, my dear colleagues from the European Commission. At first, I really would like to thank you for what I felt was very strong, overwhelming support in most of the intervention for the ambitious proposal the Commission has tabled today. And I really would like to thank you for the inspirations we at many occasions we drew from this House, from your resolutions, from your debates we had with you when we've been looking for the ways how to best respond to your calls for demonstrating bigger solidarity, for using this crisis as an opportunity to modernise European economy and for consolidate the position of Europe as a global actor and global player. We proposed the proposals which was never done before. It really sounds precedent because what we wanted to do was to adapt the initial multi-annual financial perspective proposals to the current needs, and because we fully realise that the economic crisis is so sharp and so deep, we knew that we need to come up with a new instrument which we named Next Generation EU. Altogether, we are talking about 1.1 trillion of the proposal for MFF, an additional 750 billion of euros for the Next Generation instrument, which would be divided between grants and loans, as you suggested in your resolution. I very much appreciate that Mr. Weber, Madam Garcia Perez, Mr. Cioloş supported this approach. And I would like to reassure you that we know that the success of these proposals would be judged by the results. If we invest the money in the right areas, and we definitely want to do that. We fully realise that if we want to modernise the European economy, we have to invest in green, sustainable technologies. We have to be much more digital than we are right now, and we have to learn our lessons for improving the resilience of the European economy, because we learned how difficult it is to be dependent on some global value chains or single supplier of such a sensitive health materials as we have seen over the last few months. So what we put on the table is the proposal how to not only overcome the crisis, but how to modernise it, how to respect the important social aspects of our policy, and how to make Europe really ready for the post-COVID 21st century world. A lot of questions, and some of them presented with a great vigour, being linked to the debt and also to the own resources. Mr. Meuthen, Madame Aubry, Mr. Van Overveld. Here again, I would like to tell you that we did our homework. We studied the issue very carefully, and we are coming with the different options for the own resources, which we want to, of course, explore with you and with the member states. We want to use the new ETS revenues, which will be coming eventually from the aviation and maritime sector, to use them for financing parts of the MFF in the future. We are considering so-called single market tax, especially from those companies which are benefiting from the fact that the single market is so big and functions that well. We will be following carefully how other countries and powers on this planet are respecting the Paris goals, and if they are really reducing the carbon footprint of their products and of the economy. And we would be ready to proceed, if necessary, with a carbon adjustment tax, which again could be the revenue of the European budget. And we are, of course, not forgetting about the possibility of the digital taxations, where, of course, we want to have a global agreement, preferably within OECD or G20. But if this would not work, we are ready to consider to go alone. And Madam Szydło and Mr. Azman have been highlighting the importance of the tax evasion and unfair tax practices. This is, of course, one of the priorities upon which we are going to focus. And for us, the proper executions of the European budget and proper tax collection is, of course, one of the key priorities. To be quite honest, I didn't quite get the comment of the honourable member, John Joshi, who was criticising us for lack of transparency. At 12 o'clock, we in the college adopted these very important proposals, and 1 o'clock, the whole college was here. The European Parliament was the first audience where we presented our proposals, where our President went into great detail what we want to do, how we want to accomplish it. And therefore, I think that that tradition, where we fully respect the democratic scrutiny of the European Parliament, would be, of course, maintained in the future. And we will be debating with you all of the legislative proposals, which are very complex and where we need the close cooperation and very close consultation. There have been several questions linked with the state aid. I have to say that my colleague, Executive Vice President Madame Vestager, is known for her vigour in reviewing and assessing every single state aid application. And we also have to agree that these last 3 months have been totally exceptional. At first we had to fight for the lives of our citizens, then for their livelihoods and for the jobs. And this is what we've been, with your help, doing since the beginning of this year. If you allow me, Madam President, to conclude with a plea, with a request, because I think that we are at a truly historic European moment where we need all of us to show clear political leadership. We would very much appreciate the strong support of the European Parliament, as Mr. González Pons has highlighted. But we also need your help to convince your compatriots back home. Therefore, I'm also addressing this request towards the Council, towards the Member States, because we need the good decision, we need the quick decision, and of course we need to work very closely with all national parliaments as well, because in the end, when we are talking about the headrooms, ceilings and own resources, we need also positive ratification of the national parliament. Therefore, what we need is true political leadership which would help Europe to overcome the crisis and really to prepare it for the next phase. So my last sentence would be directed to all of us. So let's do this effort for the European Union. Let's do it for the next generation, and let's do it for demonstrating our citizens that we know how to overcome the crisis and how can we prepare the Europe for the 21st century. Thank you very much, Madam President.
Thank you, Vice President. Und zum Abschluss der Debatte erhält...
To conclude the debate for the Council, Minister Brignac.
Thank you, Madam President. Honourable members, first I would like to thank you for this debate, and I will convey your views to my colleagues and to the President of the European Council and his team. As I said in my opening intervention, the Council has started preparatory work on the Commission proposal so to create the conditions for the agreement as soon as possible. As I already mentioned yesterday, at the video conference of the EU Affairs Ministers have discussed the principles and the elements that needed to be addressed in the shaping the instruments that will help the kickstart the European economy and achieve its medium and long-term priorities, such as cohesion, convergence, solidarity, flexibility and inclusiveness, as well as restoring a functioning single market and strengthening the resilience and strategic autonomy of the EU in face of the future challenges. They stress the need to make the funds available immediately and in a sufficient amount. Offsetting the immediate negative impact of the crisis is important for the EU credibility. These discussions will continue in the coming days and weeks at all Council levels. We are hopeful that the Member States' positions would be converging in order to have a timely agreement on the next EU budget, which will also be discussed by the European Council. The Council will need guidance from the European Council before it can form its position. The European Parliament shares our sense of urgency on the MFF, whose speedy adoption has far-reaching consequences for our citizens, our businesses and our local and regional authorities, as mentioned here. The Presidency will continue to listen carefully to the Parliament's position and look forward to the continued cooperation between our two institutions to prepare the ground for an ambitious, forward-looking MFF and to provide a strong response to our current and the future challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Damit ist die
That brings the debate to a close. The minutes of this sitting will be submitted to Parliament for its approval at the beginning of the next sitting. The session of the European Parliament is adjourned. The sitting is closed. Thank you.